pretty passive. And I'd always want to be like, hey, because the ball would go out of bounds and they just let the kids like chase it down. And the kids are still like playing and the ball's 20 yards out of bounds. I'm like, you're going to blow the whistle? You got a whistle, man. Like, blow that thing. And, just how passive they were was frustrating at times.
Well, these kids are not quite at GOAT status just yet, but I think maybe some of them we could see on the national team here or there, maybe a college team. But I want to get to the main topic of the week because there has been a lot of chatter in the NFL, and I know that this is probably piling on again to something that is being talked about a lot. But Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers are really the talk of the town these days in the NFL. And I would say probably for the first time in their collective careers, it's not in a good way. Both the Bucs and the Packers are 3-4. They both have looked listless the last few games, and Brady and Rodgers have been at the center of this storm. And I just have to ask a fundamental question that we can break down a little bit more. But how do we know if these guys are done or not?
I don't know. What I'll tell you about Tom Brady is I'm probably more frustrated with him than Aaron Rodgers in this case because that guy has everything. Family, beautiful wife, at least from the outside looking in. We don't know the day-to-day details, but he appears to have a wonderful life outside of football, a bajillion reasons to just walk away. You've done everything that could be done. You've won, 6 Super Bowls or whatever?
7.
7. Yeah, I mean, that's absurd. Just walk away. You're the greatest. Go live your wonderful life with your beautiful wife and your beautiful kids and just be, preserve your legacy. Why he's still playing, I guess you could say for the love of the game, but at this point, it seems it feels selfish, I would say. I mean, it's basically cost him everything. And then in Aaron Rodgers' case, I get it a little more. I mean, the guy's just kind of a loner traditionally. He doesn't seem to last long in any sort of relationships. He's kind of estranged from his family. And this is kind of all he has in a way. So I don't blame him for hanging on. But I think he struggles the older he gets because he does not relate well at all to young players. I don't think because he demands such a high level of perfection or excellence that you're not going to get out of most rookies, and it makes things more difficult. But are they done? I don't know. Knowing our luck, we're going to sit here and bury these two schmucks, and one of them's going to go on and make a run at the Super Bowl or something. But I would say we could probably officially start making arrangements for Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. I mean, that division's bad enough. The NFC South's pretty bad too, but I think the North is volatile enough that they could make a run and come out. I mean, it's hard to go play in Green Bay in February, so they got a chance.
Here's the thing about both of these guys that I find interesting is I think they're both in this predicament for different reasons that are almost kind of the same. So Brady, the reason that he's great, and I think we've talked about this even, is that he's singularly devoted to football. He's obsessed. He works harder than everybody else, and I think that has been proven over time that he works hard. Alex Guerrero, who's his doctor, who's not a doctor, guru, whatever you want to call that fucking guy, has convinced Tom that he's going to be great until he's 50. And I think Tom had the ability to go out on top. He could have retired after 2020 because I think, like Kobe, he wanted to prove that he could do it without Belichick. He did it in his first go-around. He had the chance to leave. And from a family perspective, his wife has been telling him for a while, hey, I'm done with you playing football, because there are a lot of factors that go into it. And at his age and what he's accomplished, I can actually see her argument. I would say if he was 30 years old, then maybe that argument doesn't hold any water. But at 43 years old, winning your 7th Super Bowl, nobody's going to eclipse that. Like, we all know that. Even as great as Mahomes and Josh Allen are, they're not going to win 7 Super Bowls. I'm pretty confident in saying that because it's supposed to be that hard. Like, the greats are the greats for that reason. And I think what is plaguing him this year is that he is so devoted to football, but he's not working harder than everybody else this year because there's so many things going on. And you're right, he's lost everything. And yet somehow, some way, that hasn't stopped him and had him say, look, I need to take some time off to figure this out. He clearly loves football more than anything else. Aaron Rodgers, on the other hand, I don't think loves football more than anything else. I think he loves himself more than anything else. And his unrelatability to these young players, when that's all that he has, is his inability to continue to win. And I think that what separates him from Tom Brady is he doesn't actually care about winning. I really don't think Aaron Rodgers cares about winning another Super Bowl. I see him more in the Kyrie Irving realm. Very talented, kind of quirky. And I think if he doesn't win another Super Bowl, his life is going to be fine. He'll be totally fine. So I think that they're in the places that they are for different reasons. I think Aaron Rodgers has more years left, but he's not going to be able to survive if he's going to treat the talent this way. And I think Brady missed an opportunity to go out on top and retire personally. That's just my thought. And maybe some people out there who are devoted to something can tell me differently, but there comes a time in that sport where if you don't retire, the sport is going to retire you. And if this is the year that Tom Brady retires, we're going to see a mediocre Tom Brady for the first time in our lives.
Yeah, we've seen it. You don't just see it in sports. We've seen it in other avenues, whether we talked about Lee Corso, a month or so ago, and just is it kind of a deal where it's almost a detriment to his legacy, which, I kind of backpedal on that. I think he's done an okay job, and they've done a good job at sort of keeping him involved and everything else. But we've seen the same sort of scenario in other ways, whether it's musicians. It seems like it happens all the time. You have these musicians who are superstars, and then by the end, they just can't walk away, and they're out there playing. They went from playing in stadiums to playing in some sort of small theater somewhere. And that's a little different because it doesn't require the maybe physical talent that something like football takes. But yeah, I cannot wrap my head around why Brady's doing what he's doing. It's kind of sad to watch a little bit. It makes him seem more human. I would say that, because you're like, gosh, like maybe I'm smarter than Tom Brady because I even know that this is dumb. And like you said about Aaron Rodgers, yeah, I do think that he really thinks highly of himself. He strikes me as the type of guy who always thinks he's the smartest guy in the room.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
Yeah, and I mean, you can tell it when he is interviewing with the press after a game or whatever, that he's just kind of condescending. And
Yeah, you're right.
yeah.
You're right about that. And I've always thought that that was a part of him that I liked, but over the last couple of years, I found it to be actually off-putting. Maybe that's me getting older, but there's something about Aaron Rodgers that I just don't like anymore. And I'm actually getting to that place with Tom. While we've all wanted him to be more human and more interesting, that is causing, I don't know, like the humanity that we're seeing is such a negative thing. Like you never want to see somebody's life fall apart. And we don't know. I mean, we're speculating that that's actually what's happening. But for somebody to have what he has had and to throw it away for a sport that isn't going to give a damn about him when he retires, it's baffling to me, because there are people who would die to have what he has or half
Yeah,
of
and
what he has
yeah, and Giselle could be a monster. We don't know, right? I mean, she could just be an absolute maniac, and we
in
have no
bed.
idea.
Yes.
But right, we hope so, but we have no idea. I mean, we can all assume, at least from a distance, that doesn't appear to be the case. And you're right about Rogers, man. I just cannot, just the sort of entitlement that he has about himself. And I have no problem with someone who wants to be honest and be direct with people,
Sure.
but I think that you have an obligation. If you're going to wear that hat, you need to be honest about yourself too. Otherwise, you lose all credibility and you're just an asshole. And you don't ever hear him very often kind of accept responsibility for things or be critical of himself. It's always, him putting someone else down in some way.
That's why I liken him to Kyrie Irving. I kind of get that vibe from him too.
For sure.
But both of these franchises are in a tough spot though, because they have an aging quarterback and they really don't have any future beyond it. I think the Bucks are in a much worse position because, like I said, I think Rodgers has a few more years left. They might be able to get a receiver or two to appease him the last few years. The Bucks have nothing because that team is going to get completely imploded once Brady leaves. And getting the aging quarterback out at the right time is always the hardest thing to do. And just about every franchise has gotten it wrong because they want to hold on. They want to hold on. That's the athlete in them. But speaking of quarterback changes, this year I feel like we have more controversies or conversations around quarterbacks. And we've kind of dipped our toe in this a little bit because you are a Cooper Rush guy. And Cooper Rush was replaced this week by Dak Prescott. And last night during the Monday Night Football game, which wasn't much of a game, the Chicago Bears, I cannot believe, went to Foxborough and just put a whooping on the Patriots. Mac Jones started that game, went 3 for 6 with a pick, and was pulled at a really short leash. And we just found out that Frank Reich is benching Matt Ryan, who is, I think, his 7th quarterback in however many seasons he's been there. And I want to talk about changing quarterbacks because let's focus on the Patriots for a second. So Mac Jones gets hurt. They picked him number 15 last year. And they get this Zappy kid. Matt gets hurt. Zappy comes in. They almost beat the Packers. They win 2 straight after that. And he looks really, really good. Now, any third string or second string quarterback can look good in flashes. But Mac Jones comes back last night. There's been rumblings, I'm not sure if you've heard this, that he hasn't been really getting along with the organization. From what I understand, Mac Jones is in a why asker, and he has a coach that doesn't give a shit about giving you the answer. Just do what I tell you to do. And it seems like Mac got the nod last night, but had a really, really short hook. And I have to ask you, what would you do in this situation if you were Bill Belichick?
Well, I'm not Bill Belichick, first of all, not even close.
For
Because
right now, you
I'm the
are.
type. My frame of mind is, if I have enough conviction to tell you to do something a certain way, I should be able to at least explain to you why that is. And I always took that approach as a coach. I take that approach as a supervisor, a manager in my professional life. That if I ask you to do something and you want to ask me why, I should be able to give you a reason why we're doing this way, or why I'm asking you to do that thing. So I honestly disagree with Bill in that regard, but the guy is highly decorated, and I am not the one to sit here and put him in his place. His job's to win football games, and not make friends or whatever. And if he feels like Mac Jones isn't the guy, then you got to move on. Now, Bailey Zappi has been good for a few games, but the more and more tape that gets out there, defenses eventually catch up, hone in on tendencies and things like that. So it's tough to make a broad judgment off of a couple games. Now, if he comes in and starts the rest of the season and wins a good percentage of ball games, then we can maybe consider that that's a viable option.
See, I feel like Mac Jones was drafted, and while I like Mac Jones, I haven't been wowed by Mac Jones. I know he made the playoffs last year, but this year he looks like he has regressed, and I'm not really sure why. Is it a coaching thing? McDaniel's leaving? What has changed? Because Belichick did laud him in the offseason to say that he has made a lot of strides and a lot of improvements, but we're not seeing that on the field.
Well, he was kind of the highest drafted, what I would call stopgap quarterback I've ever seen, in a way, because I don't know that they were convinced that he was the answer, but I think they believed that he was well coached enough and had enough of a skill set to at least get them by until something better came along. And I think he still is that. Maybe it is a matter of, I mean, fuck, let's talk about who his OC is, right?
Yes.
I mean, the guy was a D coordinator forever. You're gonna tell me that, he's able to. I mean, I think you have to have a sort of unique understanding of who Mac Jones is to put together an offense that he can succeed in. Matt Patricia may not be the man for that job.
But at what point is it on Mac to improve in his second year? I understand that your rookie year, your coach, your OC, the scheme, all that stuff matters because you're getting used to the game speed in the NFL, all that stuff. But Mac Jones, I feel like in his second year, needs to take a little bit of a step up and have that responsibility. You talked about Aaron Rodgers, and I get it. You ask a lot of questions. You want to know what's going on. Matt Patricia, guy who hasn't coached offense, I totally understand Mac Jones's reservations. But at the end of the day, isn't it put up or shut up? Isn't that what we
Yeah,
always say about these guys?
yeah. I mean, football's football. You may be asked to do things in some different ways, but the game, throwing a 15-yard out is throwing a 15-yard out. The game, reading a defense is reading a defense. How your offense fits into that is relevant, but not overly relevant. I think that everyone would agree that Mac Jones had a limited skill set when he came into the league. Everyone knew he wasn't so much of a playmaker, but he wasn't the type of guy that was going to go out and lose a game for you. At least that's how people perceived him. I think he's pretty much lived up to that billing for the most part. Yeah, while it's up to him to sort of put up or shut up, like you said, don't know if he's talented enough to do that. And yeah, we could say, for a long time, Alabama quarterbacks sort of had that reputation, but then look at Jalen Hurts and Tua. They're kind of
Hmm.
breaking the narrative as far as that goes. But I don't know. I never believed that Mac was the long term answer in New England. I thought that maybe there would be some magic there, possibly, but I thought that was, there's a small chance that that was going to be the case.
See, I think last night they should have started Zappy and not Mac Jones because Mac Jones has a high ankle sprain. We know that that's a tough injury to come back from. But I think by starting Mac and then pulling him so quickly, it was dysfunction. Zappy comes in the middle of the game. Yes, they scored 14 points right away, but had he gotten the starting nod, they might have been able to get a little bit momentum. But at that point, when they brought him in, the Patriots were already down. Their game plan had already changed. The defense had already given up a bunch of points. And I just felt like Belichick needed to go with that quarterback for a minute. But again, I think what skews this here is that he's done this before. And Mac Jones is not an established guy, whereas Dak Prescott getting benched for Cooper Rush would be insane, unless of course he's playing really, really bad. Now Dak came back against the Lions. The first half was very sluggish. Then I think they got into a little bit of a rhythm, and I see that Dak is the guy. Like Dak doesn't need to do a whole lot for the Cowboys to be successful. But in those two scenarios, one guy is established and he's paid a lot. The other guy, this is his second year, and Mac Jones, I think, needs to prove something, or else this kid could pass him. And neither one of these guys may be the answer. But this is in the here and now, and Bill Belichick is a guy who's going to make the right decision. Remember, he benched Drew Bledsoe, who had just signed a contract like the year prior, and Tom Brady won 6 Super Bowls with them. So that's just my opinion. But the one I want to really ask you about is near and dear to your heart, and that is the Indianapolis Colts. So the Colts have looked okay. I think that's a good way to put it. Through 7 games, they're what, 500, 3-1, or whatever their record is. I can't remember.
Matt Ryan, it's sad to kind of see him go out like this because you talk about a guy that was really talented, had a very nice career in Atlanta. And I think it kind of all went downhill for him a little bit after the Super Bowl there, where Brady and the Patriots came back from 20 whatever points down to beat him in the second half. The guy's he's not going to be a Hall of Famer because I don't think, they never won a championship, never kind of won any big games, but he's supremely talented. And I was kind of hopeful that he would be able to resurrect his career a little bit in Indianapolis, but that just hasn't been the case. And it's sad to see a guy's career sort of wind down this way. But the season is probably all. I know 3-1's not terrible. There's still plenty. That division's bad. You could still find a way to win the division and get into the playoffs. But if you're going to make a change, now's the time to do it. So you can give. If you really want to take a look at that guy, the backup there, whose name's escaping me, as most others. Now's the time to do it. So you get a good sample size going into the offseason. He's going to have what 10, 12, 14, whatever games under his belt. Now's the time to take a look at him and see if he can win football games for you, especially while he's got the rest of the season to sit in the same quarterback room as Matt Ryan, a guy that has a ton of knowledge and can bring him along. And I think that, you might think these guys have egos, and I'm sure that Matt Ryan does, but these guys know how the game goes, and he's probably the type that would take someone like that under his wing and bring him along.
I guess I'm confused about this move because while I agree with you that Matt Ryan is definitely aged and at the point where he is getting very close to, if not already kind of washed, I guess I'd be more on board with what Frank Reich is doing if Matt Ryan had looked like absolute crap and the team was 1-5. But he's had some games there that he has looked really, really good. And keep in mind, that is without Jonathan Taylor being at Pro Bowl status or even out of the game. And they've managed to win 3 games. And Sam Ellinger, that's the guy you couldn't remember, former Longhorn, Sam Ellinger, by the way, he is a guy that I don't think Frank Reich even thinks is the guy either. And yet it's just weird. Like, I don't see a rhyme or reason to why it has to happen this way. Because if you weren't sure about Matt Ryan, why did you bring him in the first place? I mean, they traded for the guy. So let him start the whole year.
Two words for you. Jim Irsay are the 2 words you're looking for. Frank Reich, knowing the position he's in and is being on the hot seat, he has no say-so in what's happening right now. And this is coming from the top. Jim Irsay saying, I've seen enough. Get the kid in there. Let's see what he can do. And I think there's that's my first assumption. The other possibility is that Frank Reich this is his last ditch effort to save his job, is to make a quarterback change. That's a possibility. That's what's happening too. Is he's like, all right, we got to do something. I have to show I'm making some sort of a change to jumpstart things to save my job, and this is the bold move I'm going to make. It's possible. That's what's happening.
I mean, I guess it's possible that Jim Irsay is making this call, but Jim Irsay seems like the kind of guy who wanted a guy like Matt Ryan. So yeah, he's going to bring him in and have his hands in on that. I don't know. I feel like Frank Reich is the one making this call, and I really don't see Frank Reich as the kind of guy who's going to be a puppet. And I know that Jim Irsay is one of those owners in the league that, very small group of people who may be seen as meddlesome, but I've never gotten him in the same place as Jerry Jones or Daniel Snyder or guys like that. I guess I'm just a little bit confused because they had Ellinger on the roster already. So you've already had 8 different quarterbacks in the 3 years that Reich has been there. Why not just keep Ellinger, and why trade for Matt Ryan? I mean, they're clearly they don't have a plan. If Jim Irsay is making this call, he doesn't have a friggin' clue what he's doing because they don't have any plan for what they're going to do long-term at quarterback. They're not good enough to be, they don't have a quarterback to make them good, and they're not bad enough to be in the top 10. So, like, what are we doing here? Are we just going to be a steaming pile of disappointment forever?
I certainly hope not, but when's the last time someone who wasn't even on the roster had such a significant impact in a franchise's future? And that person I'm talking about is Andrew Luck. The guy's not even on the roster anymore, hasn't been for several years now, but he has single-handedly like submarined the Colts franchise by his premature retirement. And I understand why he did it and everything else. I mean, the guy took a beating for the time that he was there, and he did the opposite of Tom Brady. He chose family, and I'm not going to blame that guy for 1 second for that. But you talk about they didn't have a plan, and yeah, he's still here years later. They still haven't figured out what the answer is.
I don't blame him whatsoever because I think if you're going to pin anything on Jim Irsay, it's how much of a beating Andrew Luck took being the franchise guy. And they basically had tissue paper for an offensive line until he left. And then they finally had one of the best offensive lines in the league for like 2 years. So irony is what I would call that. Speaking of irony, we're going to talk about storming the field. But first, from last week, so we didn't get to talk about Alabama losing to Tennessee. It would have been a great conversation between the two of us because it was really a game for the ages, a game of the century, all that. And Tennessee fans, having not won against Alabama in 15 years, stormed the field at Neyland Stadium. I can't blame them for that. However, there was a little bit of an altercation from an Alabama player, Jermaine Burton, who video surfaced last week. And this is old news now, but it still kind of creeps up. Apparently, there is video of him punching a woman or a girl in the face or something like that as the crowd was coming onto the field and part of that. I personally find storming the field to be sort of archaic and kind of dangerous, especially nowadays when the players are still on the field, all that stuff. But I wanted to ask you, Nick Saban played him this week, basically said we looked into it. We didn't feel there was a need to bench him. The video is just a small snippet of what actually happened. People are saying he was scared and that's why he did it. But when I see a man hitting a woman, it definitely gives me a little bit of pause. And I wanted to ask you about Mr. Saban and how you've kind of felt about how this situation has gone down. And do you feel like maybe Nick Saban made the right call because he knows more than we do?
Well, I'm a fence sitter, and our listeners are going to learn that, and that's not a great trait to have in this industry. But I am a fence sitter 90% of the time because I like to think I'm open minded. I can see both sides. I agree with what you said about storming the field. I think that it's dangerous, especially this day and age, especially in a scenario where you have the losing team still on the field while it's being rushed by probably drunk and crazy, 19, 20-year old men and women who are, hyped up after a big win. And now they're going to be coming face to face with 19, 20-year-old men that just lost the biggest game of their lives up to that point. And just that all that emotion wrapped up into that moment is just a recipe for things like this to happen. My understanding is that there was some young woman that saw this player, shouted some things at him. He, turned his head, took a few steps towards her, and like pushed her or something. I haven't seen the video. Both people are wrong in this scenario. There's no reason some college co-ed should be screaming in a player's opposing player's face on the field. And as a student athlete, especially somewhere like in Alabama, you got to be above that. You have way too much to lose than to engage in that sort of activity. But it's an emotional moment. You're probably at that age still a fairly emotionally immature individual, and it's a lot to overcome. I'm not making any excuses for him. That's just the truth. I have not seen the video, so I don't necessarily feel like I can say if Nick Saban did or did not make the right decision. But it wasn't anything that Nick Saban or that young man did that created the situation for that to happen. Now, what's the answer as far as storming the field? I don't know. Do you say you have to hold everybody back until the opposing team gets off the field and they can storm the field or something? I'm not sure. But I really don't feel like I can make a determination on if this was the correct decision or not.
I just feel like I want Nick Saban to do something small. Like, all right, don't suspend him for the game because maybe you're right. Maybe there are two sides to this. But if I'm Nick Saban and I'm an Alabama player and I'm at the Alabama head coach, I hold my players to a very high standard. I don't want to see that no matter what the situation is, because as you have pointed out, Nick Saban coaches his team to be ready for every situation, and that includes losing a big game on the road. And if I see one of my players doing something like that, again, I understand that it can be instigated. I'm not saying that a woman can just do whatever she wants to a man and he's not allowed to retaliate in some way. But if she was out there acting drunk and so forth, he has taught his players to be poised in the most difficult of situations. So just walk away. And
Yeah,
if he
you
didn't,
got to be above it. You got to be
but
above it.
but Nick Saban is like, I don't really feel like that's a big deal, which tells me that Nick Saban and all of his morality bullshit, he doesn't actually care about it. He just wants to win football games, and that's what he's paid to do. I get it, but I wish there wasn't this like incongruous view of what we want, because out of one side of his mouth, Nick Saban is talking about the sanctity of education when Jimbo Fisher, who we're going to talk about later, is buying the best recruiting class. And then
Remember
here's
the
Nick.
horns down thing, or the
Yeah,
screaming at the horns down deal, right? He's
that's
losing his mind as players for doing that,
yeah. He's like,
right?
don't do that shit, and yet they can push somebody and they can play the next
Did you
week.
see the video?
I have to admit that I didn't see the video, at least not in
I
its entirety. I saw a clip of it and it wasn't great, but it just feels like something that Saban, given the standards that he sets, he would have something to say. Look, you're not playing for the first half.
well, and I mean, not that this should matter, but at a place like Alabama, I'm sure that guy's backup is very good. It's an opportunity to teach a lesson, right? That may, even if that individual doesn't learn from that lesson, maybe someone else on the team would be like, well, hey, coach is willing to like bench that guy over something like this, then, you know, then he'll bench any of us or whatever. I mean, there's a lesson to be taught there in that situation. And so I will agree with what you're saying on that. But like I said, I feel like it's tough for me to make a definitive determination without seeing the video itself. Obviously, I don't condone any sort of male on female violence, but without seeing sort of the nature of it, it's tough to, I guess, be, to really pick a side.
Well, something that you don't need to see a video of that's just completely stupid is Clemson's fans storming the field after beating Syracuse this week. They had a comeback victory over Syracuse. Apparently, it's some tradition for Clemson fans to storm the field after certain victories. I don't really understand this, but I want to ask you, like, when is it acceptable to storm the field? Because I feel like it should be safe for when a true underdog beats a real Goliath. Like, none of this 25 beats number one crap or something like that. I want to see it when teams like JMU goes to Blacksburg or hosts Virginia Tech and beats them. Something
Yeah.
that we would never see in our lifetime. It should be like that, but we see it so damn often, especially in college basketball now.
Yeah, I think it's got to happen it's justifiable in a program changing or program defining victory.
Yes.
So now I would argue though that Tennessee beating Alabama, being how long it's been, I'll give a pass to that.
Oh,
Um,
I agree with you on that. I'm not saying that that particular one was bad, but Clemson against
over
Syracuse, like,
Syracuse, yeah, like they act like it was 2002 basketball game.
no, yeah,
It was
just
not.
I want nothing to do with that. And if you want to know one of the reasons why I can't stand Clemson, it's like shit like this. And Dabo's in the middle with the reporter. Oh, this is the best atmosphere ever. And I was like, you beat Syracuse. Who gives a shit?
Now Syracuse isn't bad, and I
No.
might just be saying that because I'm hopeful that Notre Dame can go to the Carrier Dome on Saturday and maybe pull some magic out of their ass and return the relevancy. Which, honestly, I'm telling you right now, I'm gonna call this. So Notre Dame has to go to Syracuse Saturday. Syracuse is ranked somewhere, what,
16.
16? Okay, and then the following Saturday they host Clemson, and I will be at that game.
Okay.
Notre Dame's gonna win one of those games, and
Okay.
and it's gonna piss me off. Like I mean, it's gonna piss me the fuck off that they're gonna win one of those games because you're gonna tell me you can go to Clemson and beat 16th ranked Clemson, or excuse me, 16th ranked Syracuse, or beat 5th ranked Clemson at home, but you can't beat Marshall, you can't beat Stanford, or whatever. Now I can tell you this much: if Notre Dame beats Clemson, me and my father will not be storming the field at Notre Dame Stadium. I can tell you that right now. Be a great win, yes, not storm the field worthy at
I
all.
completely agree with you on that. And it's funny you mentioned Notre Dame beating one of those two teams, because that kind of falls into the parity that we've talked about. And when we realigned the NCAA, which was the first ever episode we did together before we were even together as co-hosts, and we talked about how parity is great for the sport.
It
And
was our
as
first date.
Yeah, exactly. And we did not sleep together on the first date. So we're good there. We waited until we made our own show, like, 4 episodes later. But
That's your story, not mine.
sure, my words. Anyway, so we talked about how the parody of the NCAA was actually great for the fans, great for the sport, expanding the playoff and all of that. Well, we're not quite there yet in terms of the playoff. So we still have the old system. We have the 4 teams. And while the parody has been fun seeing a lot of these teams rise and fall, it begs the question, it's October 25th is the day we're recording this. Is the playoff inevitable already?
I don't think so, and that's really the reason. There's a couple factors. One is the SEC is still very much up in the air. Now, I do think it's very likely we get at least one of Georgia or Alabama will be in. Does Tennessee slip into that mix? I don't know. I mean, I do think though 2 of those 3 teams likely make the playoff. If Michigan beats Ohio State, you're gonna get one of those 2 in. The what I think is the most fascinating is who is the 4th team. If Clemson doesn't lose a game, they're most likely in, I think. If they lose, you're not gonna have an undefeated Pac-12 champ, so they're probably out, and you're not gonna have I don't know if you can still have an undefeated Big 12 champ either. Has TCU lost a game yet?
No.
Okay, so if TCU wins out and wins the Big 12, who gets in? Undefeated TCU or undefeated Clemson? If you're talking 2 SEC teams, whoever they may be, Ohio State or Michigan, is that 4th team undefeated Clemson or undefeated TCU?
But is that really what you want? Do you want to just feel intrigue over that 4th team, knowing that the
No.
other 3 are fairly inevitable? Because I think that's the crux of why it just pisses me off so much. Why my love for college football sort of takes a nosedive outside of Virginia Tech being shitty, but takes a nosedive before we even get to Thanksgiving because it feels like I'm craving, oh, I can't wait for the 4th team to be had. When it feels like the 4th team is probably not going to matter. Like even Clemson is undefeated. They're not nearly what they were. They just switched quarterbacks because they had to make the pat and they had to make the switch because they were losing to Syracuse at halftime. And they don't feel like the juggernaut that they once were. TCU, while is a great story, are they a program that you feel like can challenge whether it's Tennessee, Alabama, or Georgia? You know what I mean? Like that's why I asked, like, is it inevitable? Because to me, it feels that way. To me, it feels like no matter how things play out, we're going to get a conglomerate of teams that aren't going to stack up. Like, I just don't feel like Michigan, even if they make the playoff like they did last year, are going to stack up against Georgia or Alabama or even Tennessee.
Yeah, it's gonna be for the most part the usual suspects. I agree with you. Like there, yeah, we've had a few, Tennessee sort of the new girl on the scene, right? But other than that, yeah, it's Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan. There's really no one else in the mix other than Tennessee and maybe TCU. And I don't like that. I like the parody. I wish we had more parody, and I don't think that you can manufacture parody, but I think that you could expand the playoff, which will make it at least feel like there's some parody. And I told you before, I think 12's too much, but I'll take 12 over 4. I think 8's the number, but I'll take 12 over 4.
Because it makes me feel like the best part of the college football season is the time period in which we don't know anything. In the NFL, it's much different because the season is longer and it's a much more fun ride to get to it. Plus, there are more teams involved. So you know that your team or other teams are going to have a better chance of making it, where you're going to have a couple of teams slip into those wild card spots. Anything can happen in the NFL because once you get there, the teams are very much even once you get to the playoffs. But in terms of college football, we know that there's a huge disparity. The number 1 team and the number 25 team are not just 24 spots away from each other. In some regards, I think number 24 right now is South Carolina. Like there is a chasm between Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia and South Carolina, even though they're both ranked. And that's sad that we're getting to women's college basketball territory with this.
Well, and especially yeah, no, that's a great comparison. And then compared to the NFL, where number 32 could beat number 1
Yes.
any day. And that's funny because me and Ryan, my co-host for Pub Time, we were talking about, he's like, "Oh man, the NFC East, look at them, man, they're good." And I'm like, "Yeah, you got the Giants and you have the Eagles and the Cowboys are doing well." I'm like, he's like, "Well, the the Commanders, they're beating teams they have no business beating. I'm like, but that's just the NFL, man. Like,
Mhm.
you got dog shit teams going out every week and beating somebody they shouldn't beat. It's because the freaking disparity is so small. The margin for error is so small. And that's what's so crazy is like, can you imagine that volatility as a coach, especially a coach, where that margin for error is so small and you're relying on other people essentially to perform to preserve your job and just that line, man, is so fine between being a legend. I mean, Bill Belichick, he was pretty pedestrian until he got to New England and Brady ascended to the starting quarterback. I mean, there was nothing special. I mean, yeah, he had some success in Cleveland, and they were going in the right direction in New England. But until Brady came along, shit, man, he could have gone south real fast.
It could have, but head coaching, you kind of sign a contract and you know what it is. The players most likely are not going to get the blame. The coach is going to get the blame first. And you talked about coaches and the fine line. I would say there are quite a few coaches on the hot seat right now. The first one I want to bring up, I'm not sure if it's a hot seat situation because he's in his first year. I believe it's the Saints coach, Dennis Allen, I believe is his name. Did you happen to watch Thursday Night Football by chance?
This might have been one of the first weeks I did not take in any Thursday night football. I had a little family time Thursday night.
Well, let me tell you, my in laws were in town. We turned on the game, and all I saw was the first half. At the end of the first half, Andy Dalton got the ball twice and threw two pick sixes in a row. And the Cardinals basically went on to win the football game from that point on because there's no way you're going to recover from that. Halftime, the coach is running back. The lovely, lovely field reporter gets him and says, "Hey, coach, Andy Dalton throws two picks before halftime. What are you going to tell him at halftime?" Dennis Allen looks at this lady straight in the face and says, "Just keep doing what you're doing." Yeah, I'm sure that's going to win you a shit ton of football games doing that. Like, I do not want my head coach saying that shit.
You do not question the red rifle. Come on now. Everybody knows that.
It was awful. And I predicted the first one, too. I was like, he was getting the ball back. There's like 2 minutes left. The Cardinals scored 22 points in 2.5 game minutes at the end of the half. Like, that's just terrible.
I
And it was awful.
I tell you what, him and Marvin Lewis should go on the road, man. Like Penn and Teller, step aside. Siegfried and Royd, step aside. Like what they did in Cincinnati and just the consistency they had. I did not think highly of Andy Dalton coming out of TCU. And
No.
Marvin Lewis is one of the most boring fucking people I've ever listened to in my life. Like the fact that those guys had any semblance of success in Cincinnati is pure magic. They should go on the road, entertain us all. Go to Vegas, set up shop at the Luxor. You guys could, make hundreds of dollars, I'm sure.
But isn't it interesting, though, how the failures of the past can cloud the present? Marvin Lewis gets to keep that Bengals job for 14 seasons or something like that? Because before that, they had been absolutely terrible, like the bottom feeders of the NFL. And so to make the playoffs, 6 or 7 times in his tenure, that to them is like making a Super Bowl. Whereas most of the other teams in the league, if you have a 15-year span and you don't do anything with it. They had 0 playoff wins during Marvin Lewis's time there. 0, but they made the playoffs. They felt relevant again. And that's what kept him employed, despite the fact that we all looked at it and said, he's not the guy. And look at what happened. They get rid of the guy. They get a brand new head coach. They make the Super Bowl last year with they had Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. So that does change things. But Dennis Allen is not on the hot seat, but just a hysterical comment. Just keep doing what you're doing after his quarterback just threw 2 terrible pick sixes.
Yeah, I don't think he's on the hot seat. They're in a weird. It's always tough to rebound after you've lost a generational quarterback like Drew Brees and Sean Payton was a outstanding head coach. Had a lot of success there. I mean, he basically resurrected the Saints from nothing. Before he got there, people were wearing bags on their heads
Mm-hmm.
at games, and to kind of follow that act up and come in and hit the ground running, it's tough to do for anybody. And you know, just think of the weird dynamic they have at the quarterback position between Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston, and then you have the whole Taysom Hill dynamic. It's just odd.
Speaking of odd, so you talked about generational talents in Drew Brees. So you could make the argument that Brandon Staley with the Chargers has a generational talent in Justin Herbert. He has looked the part. We know he's got the goods. We know he's got a very, very high ceiling, and he's a great quarterback. The Chargers can't seem to put it together. They've had some injuries this year, so I'm going to give a little bit of a pass on that. But Brandon Staley was seen as this kind of like genius guy, one of those young up and comers, and he plays the analytics. But I would have to say, as somebody who likes it when guys take chances and if they're playing the analytics, he's gotten really cute in a lot of situations, and I feel like it's lost football games. I really feel like his leash is a little bit shorter than people realize because if you're handed the keys to Justin Herbert and there's a lot of talent and he's not getting any better, even though the fact that we've seen the skills, Brandon Staley, I feel like, is on thin ice here. He may not be on the hot seat, but if they don't make the playoffs this year, they are looking in a different direction.
Yeah, Justin Herbert's fantastic, or Jake Herbert, whoever. But
That's right.
he's generational talent, like you said. Brandon Staley was a D coordinator, man, and that's the one thing. Most of these other guys who are these sexy, up and coming coaches have been offensive minded people, and he's probably the most recent defense guy that's ascended. Now, what I would say he should do if he survives this season, what he needs to do is call Frank Reich, who's probably going to get fired in Indianapolis, and have him come in and be his offensive coordinator. He needs to get an offensive guy and maybe even like an older guy like Frank Reich, who's been around the league for a while. They can sort of be that voice in the room that pushes back a little bit, at least against some of the analytical stuff. I like analytics; it has a place, but there's a I think there's a balance, and I think he needs to get sort of that old veteran voice that can bring some balance and stability, and then get an offensive guy that can maximize the potential of your very talented young quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very astute point by you that Frank Reich losing his job probably. I really feel like he's a guy that if they don't make the playoffs this year, they're going to go in a different direction. He's made his last ditch effort. And from all accounts, seems like a great guy. Won a Super Bowl with the Eagles as their offensive coordinator. But I think you're spot on that he's going to find himself a job, no doubt, right? He's definitely going to find himself a job. And it's just a matter of what team has the best fit. And I think that if he goes back to being an offensive coordinator, he's going to resurrect himself a little bit. He's probably learned something. I can see Frank Reich going back and doing the Alabama treatment. You know, when all the guys that get fired go back to Alabama as some kind of a coordinator and then get resurrected. I can see that happening for Frank Reich. But what I want to ask you is, where is Jimbo Fisher going to be next year?
Wouldn't you shit if he ended up being the offensive coordinator at Alabama?
Oh, I'm
Like you
see,
said,
not
I mean,
that. Yes.
that would be so absurd. And like it would be great. And Nick Saban, I wish Nick Saban had the sense of humor to like if Jimbo was his offensive coordinator to get one of those like harness leashes people put on their 3-year-olds
Hmm.
and had it on Jimbo on the sideline. I mean, just be like, I own you, Jimbo. Like, get over here, heel boy. like, I mean, it's terrible, but it just be so entertaining to me in the worst possible way. But I don't know. I don't know if he gets a coordinator job somewhere. Maybe he kind of like just backs away for a little bit and, comes back in, to some maybe Power 5 team that has gone, become kind of irrelevant and tries to come in and resurrect them type of deal. I'm not sure, man. That's a really great question. He's so polarizing that I don't think he's just the type like Frank Reich's the opposite. Frank Reich seems the type of guy that he's very likable and you could plug and play sort of deal anywhere. I don't know that Jimbo's got a lot of friends.
But he's going to get fired, right? Like the boosters are already raising money to get rid of him because he has had the most expensive class that money can buy. And this season has been nothing short of a disappointment. I really don't think that there's enough wins that they can rip off here that are going to mend the fences because he's not winning an SEC title. So that means that there's no way to make the playoff. This is just a pedestrian team in a pedestrian gear. And that's not what they hired him for. They hired him off of a national championship to resurrect this program, and he's not doing it.
No, not at all. Who takes that job?
I mean, that's a hot take here. I really don't feel like Texas A&M is a sexy job. I don't see it as some job that
They
is a step up.
disagree. They disagree.
Oh, I know they do, and other people might. Like I'm not sitting here telling you that Texas A&M is a slouch of a university, but as far as a football job, that is not a top 10 job. I don't care. It's not even really an SEC job. That's right. I said it. Just because they're in the SEC, it's a Big 12 job. It still
Two
is.
names. Two names. Luke Fickle at Cincinnati. Matt Campbell, Iowa State. Now I would take Luke Fickle,
Yes.
but those are going to be those are the two sexiest names out there right now, I think. The guy at Coastal Carolina too, is probably gonna be in some conversations after this year.
Yeah, I agree. So you mentioned, or I mentioned about expectations and about how the past can shade that. So Yankees manager Aaron Boone, the Yankees just lost again to the Houston Astros. They did not make another World Series. It has now been 13 years since the Yankees have won a World Series, and for the third or fourth season in a row, Yankee Nation wants to get rid of Aaron Boone. And I ask you, are the Yankees one of those franchises where the expectations are so high that you just can't have 95 or 99 win seasons, make the playoffs, and then never win a World Series? Like, do you think that a managerial change actually matters for this team?
I think those are ridiculous expectations, but I do understand that there are a few franchises in sports that operate that way. That's not going to bode well for Aaron Boone, but yeah, a perennial playoff team should not lose their coach. That guy should not lose his job over that. Now, if you truly, from an ownership, general manager position, if you truly believe that Aaron Boone is who's standing between you and a championship based off the knowledge you have of his running of the team, then yes, you should make a change. But I feel like if the guy is good enough to keep it, to win 90 whatever games and get the team to the playoffs every year, it's probably not just him. Um, one thing as you were talking about it, I thought would be interesting is and actually, I don't know if you knew this, but Joe Girardi is from where I'm from. Literally, went to the same junior high as I did everything else. What if the or the Yankees decide to retread Joe Girardi after getting the Phillies to the World Series? They decide to throw a bunch of money at him and bring him back in.
If only the Phillies hadn't fired him earlier on in the season. That might be a great, great idea for the Yankees. He's available now if the Yankees want to bring him in because the Phillies fired
That's
him.
so stupid, man. Because I saw a freaking interview like 2 hours before we got on here where they were talking to him and he was talking about the team like he was still managing them. I told you I don't follow baseball. My God, I should have known by the look on your face. I was saying that like that this is not like even right. I'm like, fuck, he doesn't even manage them anymore, does he?
I was waiting for it, but he's
But
he's he's been
God
playing
dang.
he's playing the PR card so he can get a job. Even though from what I hear, he is like the most difficult guy to manage. Remember, Joe Girardi got fired from the Marlins the year he won Coach of the Year. That's how difficult of a guy he is to have manager.
Yeah, I've gotten that vibe for sure. And like that's what I remember as I was watching. I'm like, I didn't realize he was still their manager, but fuck, that's cool. They're in the World Series because she's like, yeah, we did this, we did that. It's like, what do you think about this? And it was a really odd interview, I guess. But he was speaking like he was still a part of it. So that's
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
fantastic,
It's funny though,
fantastic.
Astros Phillies in the World Series is two teams that probably have some of the most polarizing fans. And people still talk about the Astros because they cheated, very similar to the Patriots. They're never going to get rid of it. This is not that team. And I feel like it's used as a crutch a lot. And people who are fans of a team that maybe isn't as successful are kind of using it. And right now, to me, the Phillies feel like a team of destiny. They're actually fun, but nobody can stand Philly fans. Like I'm talking about Philadelphia fans. And with the Phillies being good and the Eagles being good, all of America is just groaning.
Yeah, what a time to be alive as a sports
Hmm.
fan in Philadelphia, right? Between the Eagles and the Phillies. And I do think, especially, this is not a sexy World Series. I don't know who has the rights to the World Series this year, if it's Fox
It's
or
Fox, yeah.
whoever. You had to be praying that the Yankees would find a way into this game. You get Yankees Dodgers or something when you saw the playoffs, or Cardinals or whoever. This is not a sexy World Series, so it wouldn't surprise me if you see a lot of, you know, the media doesn't want the narrative of the Astros cheating to go away because it brings eyes to it. You're going to get people there,
Hmm.
they're going to root against the Astros just because of what happened 3, 4 years ago. Um, I don't think the media is ever going to let that die because it's always a narrative that may bring casual fans to the table.
But Houston and Philadelphia are major markets. They're massive markets. And so, from a rating standpoint, this is going to track because there are going to be people who tune in because they hate both teams. And that's exactly what these networks want, eyes on the product. And that sound means it is time for Crunch Time, our weekly rat-a-tat-tat back and forth through 10 games on the slate in sports. Coach, are you ready?
Let's fire it up.
Starting off, number 2, Ohio State traveling to number 13, Penn State in what is a Big Ten showdown. Penn State fell flat on their face against Michigan. Ohio State is going to come in and take care of business.
Not so happy Valley Buckeyes big.
Notre Dame, unranked, traveling to the Carrier Dome to face number 16, Syracuse Orangemen, which is crazy. I can't believe I'm saying that. Give me the Fighting Irish.
Yes, wake up the echoes, shake down the thunder, give me the Irish on the road.
Number 9, coaches Oklahoma State Cowboys, finally in the top 10 once again after another loss that they usually have, traveling to Manhattan, Kansas to face Kansas State. Give me the Cowboys.
This is the little apple, not the big apple. Give me the Cowboys on the road.
Number 19, Kentucky, traveling to Neyland Stadium to face number 3, Tennessee. Kentucky kind of woke up. Tennessee is really, really good. I don't see them having a letdown. Rocky Top.
We're going to hear Rocky Top a lot on Saturday. Go Vols.
Number 15, Ole Miss, coming off a loss they just could not afford, traveling to somehow always in our headspace, Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M. This is kind of a tough one because I feel like Texas A&M plays well on the road, but I'm going to give the nod to Ole Miss.
Lane Kiffin and the boys are going to bring the shovels. This is the one that puts Jimbo in the ground. Give me the Rebs.
Switching to the NFL, the Cardinals travel to the Vikings, and I feel like this is the time where Kirk Cousins is finally going to get Cliff Kingsbury fired. Give me the Vikings.
Cliff Kingsbury has 9 lives. I think he's on number 8, and he will stay there. Give me Kyler and the Cardinals on the road.
The Patriots and their rotating quarterbacks travel to the Meadowlands to face the New York Jets, who are inexplicably 5-2. This is a trap game for the Patriots. I actually like the Jets here.
Yeah, I love the Jets, and I hope that I don't know, but this is a game. It seems like that Bill Belichick is gonna go home and like beat his dog afterwards because he's gonna be so mad that they lost to the Jets.
The New York Football Giants, inexplicably 6-1, travel to Seattle to face the first place Seattle Seahawks. I just don't understand this. This is a time when I feel like the Giants are finally going to lose. They have to at some point. Geno Smith is playing out of his mind. Give me Pete Carroll and his gum chewing.
This is the most relevant game that we've had so far this season. I think that I do agree with you, though. I think that it's hard to go across country. Seattle's a tough place to play. I will take the Seahawks.
The Green Bay Packers traveling to Orchard Park for their Super Bowl against the Buffalo Bills. Give me the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen by 1 billion.
There's part of me that wants to say, oh, this is the game where Aaron Rodgers reminds all of us that we don't know what we're talking about. But fuck that guy. Give me Bills Mafia.
And last, the World Series, Astros, Phillies. Who do you like? I like the Philadelphia Phillies. They feel like a team of destiny.
Destiny doesn't get you anywhere. Give me talent. I'll take the Stros.
All right, and that is Crunch Time, and I did it last week by myself. Wasn't nearly as fun, so it's glad to have you back. I'm not just talking to the wall and talking to myself. Man, that's always the most fun part of the show, but there's still a little bit more before we get out of here. And it is time for OTW, the official OTW. Last week, we only had one half of it. I did not make a pick of the week because that's just not my bag, baby. However, stats are my bag. And Coach, do you know Mike Leach, your boy?
Yes, I love Mike Leach, and I hope this is the stat I'm thinking it might be.
I do believe that it is. Mike Leach traveled to Alabama to play the Crimson Tide a week after they lost. Literally the worst thing you could possibly do in college football. And the stat came up that the Mississippi State Bulldogs had not scored a touchdown in Tuscaloosa since 2014, and they finally did in the fourth quarter of their 30-6 blowout loss to Alabama. So kudos to the Bulldogs for scoring their first touchdown in Tuscaloosa in almost 10 fucking years.
Absolutely. Did you see the little blurb where he mentioned in his post game press conference that he thought that the Mississippi State Bulldogs must be intimidated by the Alabama jerseys?
Something like that. I just was
It's
blown away.
ridiculous. And that he thought that the Mississippi State receivers' children were going to children and grandchildren were going to grow up and have no hands because if they aren't used, they eventually go away or whatever. I'm like, this is terrible.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what was also terrible, their performance against the against the Crimson Tide. I think I saw that in Tuscaloosa they had been outscored 140-3 since 2014. Like you can't have that. That's just fucking awful.
Well, let's move on to an equally poor performance.
My friends, welcome back. It is Coach's Pick of the Week. The guy who announced it last time has been fired. It is me. Coach did not make a pick last week, so he is still sitting at 1-3-1 with Bears +7 over the Vikings. Coach, who do you have for our pick of the week? Coach Stradamus.
Hear ye, hear ye. Come one, come all to the wonderful and ever accurate pick of the week. I actually shifted gears on this literally like 120 seconds ago. I had one in mind. I was going to go with it. And I said, you know what? Let's be bold. I'm going to take the Michigan State Spartans +22 at the Big House. Not to win, but to cover the spread against the Michigan Wolverines. Give me Sparty.
The Spartans of East Lansing over the Wolverines of Michigan. So let it be written. So let it be done. And there you go, folks. That brings us to the end of the episode. Coach, do you have any final parting thoughts for our audience?
As always, we are privileged to partake in another wonderful, wonderful week of college and professional football. This is the time of year where we all start to take this for granted. I urge you, listeners, do not, because we are only mere months away from being in the football desert, and we do not want to be there. Enjoy it for what it is and while it lasts.
Drink from the oasis that is the Iceman and Coach Sports Show. Please support the Pub Time Podcast, where you can find Coach in his other form, otherwise known as Brad. And of course, Matty S Media Network for all the podcasts that we support here. We hope that this finds you safe. We hope that this finds you well. And this is Iceman and Coach.